I never believed in ghosts until one showed up at the Jefferson County Library wearing a North Face jacket and reading Car and Driver magazine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It was a Tuesday evening in October, the kind where the air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves, and I was packing up my stack of Romeo and Juliet essays when a small hand tugged at my jacket. I looked down to see a boy, maybe 6 years old, with green eyes that made my breath catch in my throat. Not because they were beautiful, though they were, but because I'd seen those exact eyes before, years ago, in a face I'd kissed goodbye for the last time in a hospital morgue. "Mom, you dropped this," the boy said, holding up my red grading pen. I smiled at him, that automatic teacher smile I'd perfected after 3 months back at Jefferson High. "I'm not your mom, sweetheart." His little forehead wrinkled with confusion. He tilted his head, studying my face with such intensity that I found myself frozen in place. "But I saw your picture," he insisted. "In Dad's wallet. He looks at it sometimes when he thinks I'm sleeping." The library's fluorescent lights seemed to flicker, or maybe that was just my vision going strange. My voice came out surprisingly steady. "Who's your dad?" "Silas Brenner," the boy said, clear as a bell, each syllable hitting me like a physical blow. "He's over there by the magazines." The world didn't stop. That's what they get wrong in movies. The world keeps going. Libraries keep humming with quiet activity. Somewhere a printer keeps churning out pages, and a librarian keeps stamping due dates while your entire understanding of reality cracks down the middle. Because Silas Brenner died 5 years ago. I was there when they pulled the sheet over his face. I spoke at his funeral, reading Shakespeare through tears so thick I could barely see the page. I threw the first handful of dirt onto his casket and heard it hit the wood with a sound that haunted me for 2 solid years of therapy. But when I looked where the boy pointed, there he was. Older, yes, beard grown out in a way he never wore it when we were together. Reading a magazine about cars he never cared about when I knew him, but it was Silas, unmistakably, impossibly alive. "My name is Marlo Chen, and I teach English to sophomores at the same high school where Silas and I fell in love 15 years ago. I'm 32 years old. I grade papers with red pens. I make teenagers care about dead poets, and I thought I knew the difference between fiction and reality. But standing in that library watching my dead ex-boyfriend turn a page in his magazine while his son ran back to him, I realized that sometimes the most impossible stories are the ones that happen on a random Tuesday, when you're not prepared, when you're just trying to get your grading done before the voice comes on." The boy I would learn was named Jasper. Reached his father and pointed back at me. Silas didn't look up. A woman joined them then, pretty and blonde, with a baby on her hip and a wedding ring that caught the light like a promise. She kissed Silas on the cheek, said something that made him laugh, and just like that, I was watching a family, his family. The family he'd built after dying, after leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of a life we'd planned together. I stood there holding 42 essays about star-crossed lovers, watching the man I'd mourned for 5 years choose picture books with his son. And that's when I knew that everything I thought I understood about love, loss, and the sharp line between life and death was about to change. Because when the dead come back, they don't come back alone. They bring new wives and children and whole lives with them, and you have to decide. Do you let the ghost keep walking, or do you call out his name and see what happens when the past and present collide? This is the story of how I found out my ex-boyfriend faked his death, started a new family, and kept my photo in his wallet like a souvenir from a life he'd abandoned. It's about what happened when his son recognized me from that photo and innocently destroyed 5 years of carefully constructed lies with 6 simple words. "But I saw your picture." 3 months earlier, I'd driven back into Maplewood, Virginia, with everything I owned packed into a rented U-Haul and a resignation letter from my school in Philadelphia, still saved in my drafts folder. Coming home wasn't part of my 5-year plan. Then again, neither was my mother's lung cancer diagnosis or my father's desperate phone call asking me to come help. Just for a semester, he'd said, maybe 2. Jefferson High School hired me within a week. The principal, Mrs. Garrett, had been my AP literature teacher back when I was 17 and thought Silas Brenner and I would conquer the world together. She didn't mention him during my interview, but I saw the recognition in her eyes when she looked at my resume. Marlo Chen, the girl who lost everything right after college graduation. The thing about small towns is they never forget your tragedies. They file them away like yearbook photos, pulling them out whenever you walk into the grocery store or pump gas at the station where you used to make out with your boyfriend between customers. But they're also kind enough to pretend they've forgotten, which is almost worse because you can see them remembering behind their careful smiles. I rented a one-bedroom apartment above the bakery on Main Street, close enough to school that I could walk and far enough from my parents' house that I could maintain some independence while helping with Mom's treatment. The apartment smelled like cinnamon rolls every morning and chocolate chip cookies every afternoon. It should have been comforting, but sometimes the sweetness felt suffocating, like the town itself was trying to sugarcoat my return. My days fell into a rhythm quickly. Teach 5 periods of sophomore English, spend lunch grading in my classroom, stay after school for tutoring twice a week, drive Mom to chemo on Wednesdays, bring Dad dinner on Thursdays when Mom felt too sick to cook, smile at concerned colleagues who wanted to know how I was really doing, tell them I was fine, just fine, happy to be home. But Tuesday evenings were mine. The Jefferson County Library stayed open until 9 on Tuesdays, and I'd claimed a corner table by the biography section as my unofficial office. It was the one place in town where nobody bothered me with memories or sympathy. The librarians were mostly new, college kids working part-time who didn't know my history. The other patrons were focused on their own work, their own lives, their own problems. I could grade papers in peace, plan lessons without interruption, and pretend I was just another young professional, not the girl who'd sobbed so hard at Silas Brenner's funeral that they'd had to help me out of the church. That particular Tuesday in October had been especially good. My students were finally starting to understand the difference between metaphor and symbolism. Mom had kept down solid food for 3 days straight, and I'd successfully avoided running into Silas's mother at the farmer's market over the weekend. I was actually humming while I graded essays, making notes in the margins with my favorite red pen, the one with the comfortable grip that didn't cramp my hand after hours of marking. The library had that perfect autumn atmosphere, warm inside while the wind rattled the windows just enough to remind you that winter was coming. A few students from the community college hunched over laptops near the reference section. An elderly man read newspapers at a table by the window. A mother whispered stories to her toddler in the children's area, their voices carrying just enough to add life to the space without disturbing anyone. I'd been teaching Romeo and Juliet for the past 3 weeks, watching 16-year-olds roll their eyes at the idea of love so powerful it could destroy you. They didn't understand yet how love could rewrite your entire world in a heartbeat, how it could make you believe in forever when you were too young to know that forever was a promise nobody could keep. They giggled at the balcony scene, groaned at the poetry, and universally declared that Romeo and Juliet were doing too much for people who'd known each other for 2 days. I didn't tell them that Silas and I had said I love you after 2 weeks. I didn't mention that we'd planned our whole future on a napkin at the diner where we had our first date, mapping out cities we'd live in and kids we'd have and the house we'd buy with the wraparound porch and the dog named Shakespeare. They didn't need to know that sometimes love hits you so fast and so hard that you don't question it. You just hold on and hope it carries you somewhere beautiful. The essays were better than I'd expected. These kids were smart, sharper than I'd been at their age, less willing to accept that tragedy was romantic. One girl wrote that Juliet should have gone to college instead of faking her death. Another argued that Romeo needed therapy, not a girlfriend. They were probably right. I was sliding the last essay into my bag when the small hand tugged at my jacket. The boy couldn't have been more than 6, with dark hair that stuck up in the back like a duckling's tail, and those impossible green eyes that made my chest tighten. He held my red pen with such earnest determination, like he'd been given an important mission. After he said his father's name, after he pointed to the magazine section, after my world tilted off its axis, I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My teacher brain kicked in first, that practical part that could manage classroom chaos and worried parents. Look, confirm, process later. Silas sat in one of the library's worn leather chairs, his profile sharp against the green reading lamp beside him. The beard was new, fuller than the stubble he'd occasionally grown in college when he was too busy studying for his engineering finals to shave. His hair was shorter, more professional. He wore a fleece jacket I didn't recognize and reading glasses I'd never seen before. But the way he tilted his head while reading, the way his foot tapped against the floor in a rhythm only he knew, those things were achingly familiar. The boy, Jasper, had run back to him, bouncing on his toes while saying something I couldn't hear. Silas responded without looking up, his hand reaching out to ruffle the boy's hair in an automatic gesture of affection that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just Silas alive, this was Silas as a father. Then she appeared, and the picture became complete. Blonde hair and a messy bun, the kind that looked effortless but probably wasn't. Skinny jeans and boots that suggested money, taste, or both. She carried a baby, maybe 18 months old, who had Silas's dark hair but her delicate features. She said something that made Silas look up and smile, and when he did, when I saw his full face for the first time in 5 years, my knees actually buckled. I dropped into the nearest chair, my bag hitting the floor with a thud that nobody noticed. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, opening the Photos app with muscle memory more than conscious thought. I kept them in a hidden album. The pictures I couldn't delete, but couldn't look at either. There he was at 23, laughing at something I'd said, wearing the same university hoodie he'd been wearing when the police said they found his car wrapped around a tree on Route 47. But the man 20 feet away wasn't a ghost or a twin, or my grief-broken mind playing tricks. He was real, solid, picking up his son and holding him upside down while the boy giggled. The baby reached for him from the woman's arms, and they did that smooth parent handoff that spoke of practice, routine, partnership. My rational mind started cataloging questions like evidence for a case I didn't want to prove. How? His brother Jake had identified the body. His mother had picked out the casket. I'd stood in the rain at Riverside Cemetery and watched them lower him into the ground. The medical examiner, the funeral director, the insurance company, everyone had signed off on the death of Silas James Brenner, age 23, killed on impact. The blonde woman checked her watch and said something about bedtime. Silas nodded, folding his magazine and tucking it under his arm. They moved like a unit, a family with somewhere to go, probably home to a house with toys scattered on the floor and crayon drawings on the refrigerator. Normal, domestic, everything we'd planned to have together. I watched them gather their things with the kind of careful attention I usually reserved for analyzing poetry. The baby's diaper bag was expensive, leather, not vinyl. Jasper's jacket had a soccer team logo on the back. Silas carried a work badge clipped to his belt, the kind that suggested an office job, stability, benefits. These weren't people struggling or hiding. They were comfortable, established, visible. When they headed toward the exit, I made a choice that would change everything. I followed them, staying far enough back that they wouldn't notice, but close enough that I wouldn't lose them. My red pen lay forgotten on the table, where Jasper had tried to return it to his father's not dead girlfriend's not me hands. Outside, the October air bit at my face as I watched them pile into a silver minivan, Silas helping Jasper with his seatbelt while his wife secured the baby. I memorized the license plate, Virginia tags BWK 4782. Then I sat in my own car and tried to remember how to breathe while the dead man I'd loved drove away with the family he'd chosen over the truth. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. When I finally made it home, I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink and opened my laptop with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The license plate number stared back at me from my phone screen, BWK-4782. Such ordinary letters and numbers to represent something so impossible. The search started simple. Virginia DMV records showed the van registered to Silas J. Brenner at 447 Maple Street, Maplewood, Virginia. Current registration, current insurance, current address less than 6 blocks from where I taught his son's future classmates. My dead ex-boyfriend had been paying his vehicle registration fees on time for the past 3 years. Facebook was next. His old profile was still memorialized, frozen in time with condolence messages I couldn't bear to read. But searching variations of his name brought up nothing new. The wife, though, she was easier to find. Bryn Caldwell Brenner. Her profile was wide open, a digital scrapbook of a life I couldn't stop scrolling through. Their wedding photos from 3 years ago showed Silas in a navy suit at what looked like a country club. Jasper's birth announcement from 6 years ago meant Silas had been with her before he died. during the time he was supposedly working late at his engineering firm, saving money for our future. Baby Winona's newborn photos from last year, first days of school, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, birthday parties with extended family I didn't recognize. People who apparently didn't know they were celebrating with a ghost. I found his new job on LinkedIn, regional construction manager at Piedmont Development Group. 5 years of experience listed, starting right after his death. The math was so brazen it felt like a taunt. He'd started his new life the Monday after his funeral. My sister Delaney picked up on the second ring. She was in Boston, had been since before Silas died, far enough away that she could love me without drowning in my grief. Marlo? It's almost midnight. What's wrong? Delaney, I need you to sit down. You're scaring me, is it, Mom? Number Silas is alive. Silence. Then, Marlo, honey, have you been drinking? I saw him at the library. He has a family, a wife named Bryn, 2 kids. He faked his death, and I need to know why. I sent her the Facebook links, the DMV records, the LinkedIn profile. I listened to her sharp intake of breath as she processed what I'd found. Holy shit, she whispered. Holy actual shit. How is this possible? We stayed on the phone for 2 hours, Delaney helping me piece together the timeline. The construction company he worked for now had been founded 5 years ago by someone named Mitchell Brenner. A quick search confirmed Mitchell was Silas's cousin, the one who'd moved to Virginia from Texas right before Silas died, the same cousin who'd been too grief-stricken to speak at the funeral. His brother Jake was a cop, Delaney remembered. He identified the body. He helped him, I said, the realization hitting me cold. His whole family must have helped him. Delaney wanted me to call the police immediately, but I needed more information first. We made a plan. I would confirm it was really him, not just someone who looked similar. Then I would figure out why someone would fake their own death at 23, leaving behind a girlfriend who loved him and a future that had seemed so certain. The next day, I called in sick and parked outside Piedmont Development Group's office at 7:30 in the morning. At 8:15, the silver minivan pulled into the parking lot. Silas got out, coffee in hand, and walked into the building like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Because he had. I took photos with my phone, zooming in on his face, his hands, the way he walked with that slight favor to his left leg from a high school football injury. This wasn't a look-alike or a twin or my imagination. This was Silas Brenner, professionally dressed and catastrophically alive. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator, paying extra for a rush job. I needed to know everything before I decided whether to destroy his life the way he'd destroyed mine, or to simply understand why the man who'd promised me forever had chosen to become a ghost. 3 days later, I stood outside Piedmont Development Group at noon, wearing my teaching clothes because I'd driven straight from school during lunch. When Silas walked out of the building, checking his phone and heading toward his car, I stepped directly into his path. Hello, Silas. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the asphalt. His face went white, then gray, then a shade I'd never seen on human skin before. He took a step backward, then forward, like his body couldn't decide whether to run or reach for me. Marlo. My name came out strangled. You can't be here. Funny, I was thinking the same about you. Dead men don't usually eat lunch at Chipotle. We stood there in the October sunshine, 2 people who'd once planned a life together, now strangers divided by 5 years of the worst kind of lie. He picked up his phone with shaking hands. My car, I said, unless you'd prefer to have this conversation in your office. He followed me to my Honda, the same one I'd had in college, the one where we'd had our first kiss in the parking lot of a movie theater. He sat in the passenger seat and put his head in his hands. How? Was all I managed at first. Then it poured out of him, words tumbling over each other like he'd been waiting 5 years to confess. The gambling had started small, just poker games with friends, but by senior year, he owed the wrong people $40,000. They came to his apartment, showed him photos of me leaving my job at the campus bookstore, walking to my car after my evening class, laughing with friends at our favorite coffee shop. They said they'd hurt you if I didn't pay, said they'd make you disappear, but not quickly. They showed me what they'd done to another guy's girlfriend. His voice broke. I couldn't let that happen to you. His brother Jake had come up with the plan. A car accident on a rainy night, a body too damaged to view, a closed casket funeral. Jake identified someone else's body, someone who'd died with no family to claim them. Mitchell, his cousin, gave him a job and a new start. The mob thought he was dead, so the debt died with him. I was supposed to leave town, Silas continued, start over in Texas or somewhere far away, but then Bryn got pregnant. We'd been together a few months, nothing serious, just trying to forget you. I couldn't leave her alone with a baby. I couldn't do that to another person I cared about. You were with her while we were together. Number after I died. She doesn't know, Marlo. She thinks we met at a work conference 6 years ago. She has no idea who I really am. I thought about the private investigator's report sitting in my apartment, the police records showing the gambling debt, the threats, the real danger that had apparently followed Silas until his death solved everything. I kept your photo, he said quietly. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't let go completely. It's from your first day teaching. You sent it to me that morning, remember? You were so excited, so proud. You said you couldn't wait to change kids' lives. Your son saw it. That's how I found you. Even your secrets keep secrets, Silas. He flinched. Jasper's starting first grade next year. What if he ends up at Jefferson? Then you better pray I'm as good at keeping secrets as you are. I studied his face, looking for the boy I'd loved. He was there, underneath the beard and the glasses and the weight of 5 years of lies. But he was also gone, replaced by someone who could live with this magnitude of deception, who could kiss his children goodnight, knowing he'd left me to grieve a death that never happened. The threats were real, I said. It wasn't a question. The private investigator had confirmed everything. They would have killed you, Marlo, slowly. They made that very clear. So you killed yourself instead. I killed who I was. Sometimes I think that's worse. We sat in silence while the lunch crowd returned to the office building. Normal people with normal lives and normal secrets that didn't involve resurrection. I loved you, Silas said finally. God, Marlo, I loved you so much it nearly killed me to leave. It did kill you, at least the version of you I loved. This person sitting here? I don't know who you are. I met Silas one final time a week later in my empty classroom after school. The October sun slanted through windows overlooking the football field where we'd shared our first kiss 15 years ago. He stood by my desk looking at the Shakespeare quotes I'd posted on the walls, probably remembering how I used to read sonnets to him in bed on Sunday mornings. I handed him the photo Jasper had seen, the one from my first day teaching. I was standing in this exact classroom, holding my lesson planner, smiling like someone who believed the future was a promise instead of a suggestion. Your son is sweet, I said. He deserves a father who doesn't live in the past. Silas broke down then, really broke, the kind of crying that changes the shape of your face. I'm sorry for everything, for choosing the coward's way. You chose to protect me. I can't hate you for that, but I can't forgive you either. We both died 5 years ago, Silas. The difference is I came back to life. I told him about Seattle, about the private school that had offered me a position teaching advanced literature. I'd accepted it that morning, would be leaving after Christmas when Mom's treatment ended and the semester wrapped up. What about Bryn? I asked. Will you ever tell her? How can I? Hey, honey, I faked my death to escape the mob and you've been married to a ghost for 3 years. She deserves to know who she's sleeping next to. She deserves to be happy, to feel safe, to raise our kids without looking over her shoulder. There was nothing more to say. We stood there in my classroom, surrounded by teenage essays about doomed love, 2 people who'd once believed we'd grow old together. Now we were strangers who shared a secret that could destroy multiple lives. Promise me something, he said at the door. If Jasper ever ends up in your class somehow, if our paths cross again, be kind to him. He's a good kid. I'm always kind to my students, even the ones whose fathers are supposed to be dead. 2 months later, after I'd settled into my new apartment in Seattle with a view of the sound and rain that felt like washing clean, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was $50,000 in cash and a note, what I owed them, with interest. Start your new life free. Teach those kids to make better choices than I did. S. I kept the note, but donated half the money to a women's shelter in Maplewood. The other half went to create a scholarship fund for students pursuing teaching degrees. I named it after my grandmother, not him. He didn't deserve that kind of immortality. I still teach Romeo and Juliet, but differently now. When my Seattle students complain that the ending is unrealistic, that nobody would go to such extremes for love, I tell them they're right to be skeptical. Love makes us do impossible things, I say, but the real tragedy isn't in dying for love. It's in the choices we make that force us to live without it. Sometimes I Google Bryn's Facebook page, though I've never sent a friend request. Jasper started first grade this year. He plays soccer and loves dinosaurs and has his father's smile. Winona is walking now, toddling after her big brother with determination that probably comes from both parents. They look happy. They look whole. They look like a family that's never been haunted by ghosts. Silas was right about one thing. Some secrets are worth keeping, not for the person who holds them, but for the innocent people who would be destroyed by the truth. I could have blown up his life with a single phone call, but what would that have given me? Not my 20s back, not the wedding we never had, not the children we never made, just more wreckage in a world that already has plenty. The boy in the library gave me an unexpected gift that day. He showed me that the dead can speak, but only if we're still listening. I finally stopped listening. I stopped waiting for apologies that wouldn't change anything. I stopped believing that grief was the same as love. Now when someone asks if I believe in ghosts, I say yes. Then I tell them the most important thing I've learned. Just because something haunts you doesn't mean you have to let it stay. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. Leave a comment below about a time when you had to choose between the truth and protecting someone you cared about. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about love, loss, and the complicated choices that make us human.